Changing times, changing minds. And of course, changing minds already refers to influence, right? You are influenced to change your mind in the direction of adopting new beliefs or another lifestyle or another view. And that sounds sort of nice and benign, but influence stretches a bit broader, as I was already, let's say, introduced to. Because influence is also about persuasion. And indeed, in my talk, I want to discuss a particular form of persuasion that is hidden persuasion. Why and how we are actually influenced by marketing and all kinds of other cues and don't even know it. And that has been my main research focus actually for the last 20 or so years. I will not go over that, by the way. I will just share with you a few, what I think, nice examples of research that actually sort of bring the point home, I hope. But before we start, let's start with a few questions. Just raise your hand if you agree. A statement. When shopping for groceries, I usually know pretty well what I need, and that's basically what I buy. Hands up if you agree. That's a lot of hands. This is going well. Another statement. Raise your hand if you agree. Marketeers and advertisers are clever people. They know very well how to play with consumers and make them buy stuff even when they don't need it. Raise your hand if you agree. Fantastic. Usually this doesn't work, but with you it does work, because this cannot both be true. So both of you agree with both of these statements, and that is actually pretty peculiar, because on the one hand you say, yes, there is this super powerful stuff out there, and that's advertising, marketing, and all kinds of other sort of sources of influence that sort of push people into directions that they could not think about. And on the other hand, there's me. And I have a set of values and preferences and beliefs, and I know full well what I'm doing. And I'm also fully aware of my choices, and my choices guide me to where I want to go, not these outside influences. And that cannot both be true, right? Because what you're essentially saying is, yes, there is a lot of power of advertising, other stuff, but that power is basically, they are basically the victim of that power, but I am not. Well, that is actually something that you share, luckily, with a lot of other people, so don't be afraid. What happened here actually is what we know from science, from behavioral science, as the so-called disposition bias. And a difficult term, but it's actually super simple. It's defined as such that in shaping behavior, consumers, but that's all of us, and I now saw proof, we tend to overestimate the power of our own preferences and own beliefs and values, but we underestimate the power of the situation, the persuasion situation where we find ourselves in. And because we do that, we overestimate ourselves and we underestimate the situation where we are, we become particularly vulnerable to outside influence because we start to not see it anymore. And that's what I would like to share with you some insights about. In sum, all of us, we think we are basically, let's say, the captain of our own ship. The ship goes where we decided to go, but that's actually not what happens. We are not on the bridge. We are not the captain of our own ship, actually. And that can basically yield interesting results, I think, interesting research results. But first things first, why is this actually happening? What is happening here and why is it happening? Well, first of all, why is that actually happening? Because there's just too much around us, right? So estimates have it that we are exposed to more than 1,000, 2,000 or 3,000 commercial stimuli each day. And even if we wanted to, we cannot simply process all that stuff. We cannot mind all that stuff. That's one thing. But apart from, let's say, not being able to process all that information, we sometimes also don't want to process that stuff. Why? Because sometimes we're tired. We're not that interested. We are, of course, busy with other things. We are too distracted to notice, etc., etc., etc. But because that is the case, the state in which we find ourselves in is actually one of mindlessness. Our radar is turned off, our vigilance is turned off, and it is in that state that we usually embark on our basically journey in the world, and hence that we're also not too vigilant about what is out there, what is aiming to influence us. And because of that disposition bias, we like to think that this is actually the exception, but not the rule. But it is the other way around. It is the rule and not the exception. And that is actually, of course, sort of makes us vulnerable to all kinds of influence. And one form of influence that sort of becomes super powerful in these conditions, under these conditions, is the so-called truth effect. I haven't studied this, but many other psychologists have studied that. And the truth effect is the idea that we tend to accept information more easily than that we reject or question it. So stated differently, anything that sort of impinges on our senses, our first gut reaction is to accept it and not question or reject it. Why? Because accepting information is easier than rejecting it. It is, let's say, easier, and hence accepting stuff is effortless, but rejecting stuff is actually effortful. And because that is effortful, you need to actively question why you don't want to accept stuff, and you don't want to do that. Because that is the case, we tend not to do it. We tend to accept stuff. And that is the truth bias, accepting information at face value. And of course, I don't have to tell you that what that can lead to, but just a few examples. Check here the newspaper. COVID shots kill and injure hundreds, right? COVID sort of misinformation or fake news. Many people believe that, and they believe that at first sight. You probably know the dude with the bullhorns on the right? Q sent him. Yeah, what is that? That is Q stands for, let's say, this QAnon, right? That huge conspiracy theory. This guy is not alone. Many people believe that, and they also believe that at first sight. That's the truth bias. So the truth bias basically says that our BS radar, in this case, is switched off, and that's a risky situation, actually. So I want to say a few more words about why all kinds of influence, not just the stuff that you saw here on the slide, actually is able to dive under the radar. And by and large, what you can say is it dives under the radar either because we simply do not see what is influencing us, or we sometimes do see what is influencing us, but then we are unaware of the fact that it had actually an impact on our beliefs or preferences or anything. So those are two main, let's say, main categories. Here is, I think, one of the most, I would say, legendary studies ever conducted about, indeed, invisible influence, influence that you cannot see. And perhaps some of you remember this or know what I'm talking about. I'm actually referring to one of the most famous studies by Vickery, late 50s in the US. And what he did is in a cinema, there was an ongoing movie, and during the movie, he flashed, for only 10-15 milliseconds, he flashed these lines during the movie. So what is it? Hungry, eat popcorn, or drink Coca-Cola. This was the birth of what was later to be called subliminal advertising. This was flashed so quickly on the screen that people could not consciously perceive it. But what Vickery recorded or observed in the break is that during the break of the movie, the sales of, popcorn and Coca-Cola went through the roof. That is actually scary stuff. People did not see this specific, let's say, these specific lines, these sentences, but it did wildly affect their behavior. Scary stuff. And indeed, people got upset. And there was a turmoil. There was a lot of publicity around this, and people began to see forms of subliminal advertising everywhere. But then it turned out later, much later, that Vickery's findings were actually false. They were a fake. Vickery admitted that he made it all up. There was no cinema. There was no study done there. He made it up because he wanted to get a bit of publicity. What a relief, we all thought. What a relief. So there is no such thing as subliminal advertising. We cannot be influenced by stuff that we cannot see. That's a good idea. That's a reassuring idea. And we had that idea for, let's say, 50-ish years, because around the turn of the century, a number of behavioral scientists, including me, but I played a super minor role, but many others played a much bigger role, started to delve into this topic again. Is it really not possible that you can be, let's say, influenced by stuff that you cannot consciously perceive? And one group of researchers here that I refer here to was from the University of Nijmegen and Utrecht. And they actually sort of put that to the test. And what they did is in their lab, they flashed a brand of soft drink, again subliminally to participants, Lipton Ice in this case, or some other thing, some neutral thing. And later people had to report the extent to which they want to drink this soft drink, Lipton Ice. And what happened, you only need to focus basically on the left-hand slide. Mostly people that were thirsty, so the non-thirsty people, for those it didn't work, but for the thirsty people, indeed the people that were had actually seen Lipton Ice, wanted more Lipton Ice, wanted to drink that more, wanted to have that more. These people had not seen the brand logo of Lipton Ice. Don't forget that. They were exposed to it, but it was so fast, 10 or 15 milliseconds, that they could not consciously perceive that. So it did happen, and it did exist. It was not a fake. The finding as such is real. It does exist. Vickery's study was a fake. But this was in the lab. And so you might think, yeah, okay, this is in the lab. So as long as it stays in the lab, no harm's done, right? But actually, sort of the Pandora's box was open already, because in around the year 2000, there was this ad was out. I'm about to show it to you, of the of the then Bush Al Gore presidential campaigns, and in it is actually a subliminal cue. Now, I'm very curious to learn whether you can actually see it.
Under Clinton Gore, prescription drug prices have skyrocketed and nothing's been done. George Bush has a plan. Add a prescription drug benefit to Medicare.
Every senior will have access to prescription drug benefits.
And Al Gore? Gore opposed bipartisan reform. He's pushing a big government plan that lets Washington bureaucrats interfere with what your doctors prescribe. The Gore prescription plan, bureaucrats decide. The Bush prescription plan, seniors choose.
Did you see it? You didn't, eh? That's exactly what subliminal advertising is all about. But once the voiceover said bureaucrats decide, this was flashed on your retina. You have processed this. And now we know that this may actually have been effective. You did not see it, but it was there, and it does affect your behavior. Now that is when, let's say, influence sort of, you don't see the source of the influence, but it does influence you. But sometimes you are aware of the stimulus, of the cue, but you don't know why it actually has affected you. You have no idea that it actually has affected you. And that is the second part that I would like to show to you. And this is ongoing work, so this is sort of in progress. Seeing the cue, but not the impact. And this is about the so-called oblique effect. Now, I have to say a few words about this. What is the oblique effect? Well, on the left-hand panel, what you see is, let's say, horizontal and vertical lines, but then in perspective. Those are called orthogonal lines. And on the right panel, you see tilted lines. And tilted lines are called oblique lines. Now, what is the oblique effect? Our visual system, the way that our visual system is organized is such that we find the processing, the seeing of orthogonal lines a little bit easier than these tilted oblique lines. And we share that with all other mammals, with fish, with birds. So orthogonal lines are a bit easier on the eye than these oblique lines. And we thought actually, well, this is a super subtle effect. And we thought, does it actually have an impact on our preferences as consumers, on our values or on our behavior? And your gut will now hopefully tell you, nah, probably not that. Wait. So what we did is we actually took this to the music industry. And in our lab, we asked participants to listen to a track that we ostensibly got from a CD. And while listening to the track, people saw the album cover from which that track was derived, and they could listen as long as they wanted. And after that, we asked them, do you like the song? How long do you want to listen to the song? Perhaps you want to buy the album. What do you think about this band? Relatively unknown bands. And what we did is, while people were actually sort of watching the cover, but we messed with these album covers. So I want to ask you now also, which of the albums that you're about to see you think is better in terms of its music? Which one is probably liked more? Or which one is perhaps even more commercially viable? So this one or this one? This one or this one? This one or this one? Well, you probably by now think, yeah, it's the music, right, that counts. So you buy stuff because you like the music. You listen to songs because you like the music. Not so, because all the people in our studies listen to the same tracks. Nevertheless, in our study, we found consistently that when these people believed that these tracks were from these orthogonally oriented CDs, they were liked more, they were listened to longer, people wanted that album more, than when people thought that they came from these albums. So that's a subtle effect, but it actually affected people's listening behavior and consumer behavior. And now you still probably think, this is indeed all in the lab, so no problem, right? But we actually did one thing more. We also checked the American album Billboard Top 100 from 1955 until now. And we had a way to basically, how you say that, to quantify all the album covers of all the albums that featured in that Billboard Top 100. Some are more, let's say, obliquely oriented, and others are more orthogonally oriented. And what we found consistently is that the albums that were more orthogonal, so with vertical and horizontal and vertical lines, that those actually systematically ended up higher in the charts than these more oblique albums, even when you control for a lot of other things. So that's actually interesting. So here we have one, Abbey Road by the Beatles, absolute classic, but look at the cover, look at the cover. This is purely orthogonal. So now you know why this album was such a huge commercial success, or at least you have perhaps part of the answer. So we are not always the captain of our ship. So how to retake the bridge? How to retake the bridge and become the captain of our own ship again? Well, it's a sort of perhaps a bit of a lame advice, but it probably works. We have to wake up. We have to wake up. If mindlessness is the problem, then mindfulness may be the solution. So I haven't invented this, but what you could basically try is to practice something that you could call persuasive mindfulness. So in line with normal mindfulness training, but with a twist. This you don't do at home. You do it there where influence takes place. Let's say, for instance, in the supermarket. So here you could basically say, do not only focus on your inner state, but particularly also on the context where you find yourself. And when that actually happens, be aware, be fully aware. Where are you now? What is happening there? Who wants what of you? And to what extent are you okay with that? Questions that we usually do not ask ourselves in a mindless state. But if you do that, then probably you will wake up and you will become a bit more mindful. And if, of course, the answers to these questions are okay for you, you can sort of navigate, you can sail, if you want, as the captain of your ship towards the offer in the supermarket. If you're not okay with that, then you have all the controls in your hands to basically steer away from what is, let's say, enacted on you. So on that note, I want to close off and basically want to wish you happy sailing.